All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get this meeting started. We have Supervisor Solis and Supervisor Nelson joining us remotely. Mayor Mitchell and myself here at the dais. And we're going to have to move as quickly as we can through. We have 4 items today, all of which need to get to our governing board this next month. So I have 40 speakers on 1469 and about a half a dozen on the rest of the items. We're going to limit all speakers to 30 seconds. So get up, make your comment. Tell us what side you're on, but we have to get this meeting completed, and the reason why is some of our board members are on the next committee meeting that starts at noon. So we don't have time to run this through all day as much as I'd love to. All right? So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I've also asked staff to shorten their presentations as much as possible. So item number 1, Tracy, go right ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you bring up the slide, please? Mr. Chair, if you'll recall back in March when we adopted the proposed amendments to Rule 1111, the Governing Board directed us to return to the Governing Board with labeling requirements under the rule that would address non-compliant furnaces and also those furnaces that could be subject to a rebate program. There are existing labeling requirements that we believe we can build off of. In our proposal before you is by October 1st, 2018, the labeling requirements would be enforced. We do have an option for executive officer approval for alternative language. However, our basic language is for the installation in SCAQMD only. This furnace does not meet the 14 grams per fuel limit and is not eligible for the rebate program. So you'll be hearing comments regarding these labels today. With that, Mr. Chair, our recommendation is to set the hearing in May for June, but we do have a recommendation that we'll be bringing to the Governing Board to move this item to July. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll conclude.
Very good. Any board member comments before the speakers? If not, Chris Forth?
No.
Was that you, Sean?
Oh, it was, yeah. Thanks, Ben. I just want to let you know no issues.
Okay. Chris Forth, if you can come down, and Dave Willingham to the other microphone. After that will be Ryan Tresser and Rusty Tharp. Go ahead.
All right, thank you.
And if you could quickly say your name for the record so we know who got up there and spoke. And
yeah, I'm Chris Forth. I run all the regulatory affairs for Johnson Controls Ducted Systems.
Go right ahead.
And so regarding Rule 11, in my 30 seconds, the labels, our basic point is we don't feel like they'll serve their intended purpose just because the consumer won't ever see those. So what we're going to support is really a couple things, is a website notification that the consumer would probably actually look at, and then providing literature in the district. Because one of the big issues we have with the labels, I think your other districts are also requiring a label. There's not physical room to have 4, 5, 35 different labels on these pieces of equipment. Well, this is we think a reasonable, alternative that should accomplish the goal that you're trying to meet.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Winningham with Linux International. Linux supports the Rule 1111 amendment regarding labeling as proposed. While Linux understands that labeling may or may not be an effective mechanism to ensure consumers are informed, it can be a component of. I think you're going to hear some alternatives that we would also be open to, but we do believe strongly that consumers should be informed at the point of purchase. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Either one of you.
Ryan Tesher, representing Remanufacturing. Similar to those comments, the homeowner does not see the label. It's installed without them seeing the product generally on the exterior or the actual unit. So we don't think that will be in line with the board's intention of educating them on the rebate program and the emissions. So we would like to say no labeling requirement and some sort of education, whether it's through utilities or through you guys doing mailers telling them about the rebate program.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Rusty?
Rusty Tharp with Goodman. We reiterate previous comments that furnaces are not bought retail. They're bought at the kitchen table, and the manufacturer literature and contractor literature is what's presented to the consumer. We agree with JCI and RE that the better way of educating the consumer would be for the manufacturers on their websites to provide information as well as to have special literature for straightforward products.
That would be provided when they're at the kitchen table?
Yes. The manufacturers would make it available to the contractors.
So maybe not to the kitchen table.
We can't control what the contractors do, but we would do our best in education of the contractors.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. So Tracy, it sounds like we got some items to maybe work on and some good comments there. And we'll,
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair.
okay. Any other board member questions on this item?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Supervisor Solis. I am interested in the issue regarding not advertisement, but placement on information on our website. I don't know what the cost would require, but I think that's a good idea. So
I think that's
wanted to
the,
make that known.
I would guess that's the easiest one of all those suggestions. So that's definitely, I think, going to be part of this.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, that's part of our plan.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not one or the other, it's both. Thank
Right.
you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So the key thing is that the consumer knows. And whether that is through website, through the contractors, at point of purchase, it's critical the consumer knows what they're getting and that they're entitled to a rebate or that they're paying a mitigation fee.
Yes, ma'am.
So
That's our goal, to get the word out as best as possible through our website, through our rebate contractors' website, their connections with the industry contractors and distributors.
right. So we have a number of different channels proposed here. So we'll ask you to come back and tell us what you've agreed to. Yeah, there will be another meeting at Stationary Source before this goes to the board, right? We're going to put this over another month. Did I hear that?
We committed to come back in June with an update regarding the rebate program, how it's established, and the advertisement, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
All right. With that, we'll move on to item number 2. Tracy again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quickly, just kind of a little recap. With the 2016 AQMP, we did adopt Control Measure CMB05, which called for the transition of the reclaiming program to a command and control regulatory structure. Combination with that is AB 617, which drives our schedule for determining BART for the larger sources to January 1, 2019. This represents the first set of transition rules that will be coming before the governing board. This does apply to boilers and heaters, but we will be addressing industry-specific rules for electricity generation and refineries. Just real quickly with the chart, you can see the applicability of the 3 rules, 1146, 46.1, 46.2, based on their heat input size. The proposal before you today is that we're going to remove the exemptions for the reclaimed facilities. We're not proposing to change the BART assessment. It stays the same as it was in 2008. So we're going to maintain the current ppm levels for natural gas, digester, and landfill units. We will apply the same compliance provisions to reclaim units between 2 and 20 million BTUs, meeting BART 12 ppm or less, and these will be implemented through proposed Rule 1100, which I'll get into in a moment. Key to this slide for you here is our emissions inventory for these sources, because it does exclude refineries and electrical generating facilities. It's 0.29 tons per day for the majority of those emissions are actually going to be under those other source categories. So our emission reductions associated with this rule for the transition to command and control is 0.17 tons per day. For Rule 1146.2, because this rule does apply not only to reclaimed facilities and non-reclaimed facilities, we're going to revisit the concentration limits for BART at a later time. We're going to commit to doing a technology assessment by January of 2022, and then based on those conclusions, we'll either require that they meet the existing 30 ppm limit that's contained in 1146.2 by 2023, or if not, we'll schedule do a schedule through proposed Rule 1100 if it's less than a 30 ppm concentration limit. For Rule 1100, this establishes the schedule for sources that are going to meet the BART rules, not only for 1146, but the other rules. In terms of 1146 and 1146.1, 75% of the units with comprising of their heat input at the facility will be required to meet the unit or the limit by 2021, with a balance of 100% by 2022. We believe that by combining 1146 and 1146.1 units at a facility adds compliance flexibility. Compliance schedule for reclaim facilities will be included in 1146.2, but we'll have to conduct that technical assessment. It's important to note that for non-Title V facilities, those facilities that are exiting reclaim to command and control, they'll follow the monitoring, record keeping, and recording requirements under 1146. For Title V facilities, we still have some issues that we need to work out with EPA, so those facilities will stay in reclaim for the time being. We have received a couple of comments, which I'll just touch on real briefly. We're committed to working with the facilities with transitions of their facility permits. We're talking about working with them, doing draft permits, kind of helping it back and forth to create as smooth a process as possible. For the facilities that are subject to the monitoring and record-keeping requirements, for non-Title V, we believe we'll be able to do a smooth transition. But for the Title V facilities, we will have to work with EPA and then continue to work with the facilities based on those permit conditions. With that, Mr. Chair, we're proposing to set the hearing for 1146 rules and proposed for 1100 in May for June public hearing.
Very good. Any board member questions before our public comment on this?
One question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Goss. Sorry. You're relying on a 2008 BART assessment. That seems rather ancient. So is that the update? Is that the best that we have, or how would that be updated?
At this time, we consider the levels that were evaluated under the previous reclaim amendments and the rule amendments to Rule 1146 as being BART. As you know, in the future, we'll be reassessing BART as time goes on, just like we have been doing with the reclaim program. And if it turns out that the technology has improved significantly enough so that we don't have increased, really high incremental costs or stranded assets, we'll be able to implement those tighter standards.
I see. So to change the BART, you've got to do a technology assessment, right? And that would take some time. So I suppose expediency is one of the issues here.
Yeah, so one of the things we want to do is we did the assessment in 2015 for the last reclaim amendment, but we'll be doing it again in the future.
Okay.
So we're keeping up with the technology advancement.
Yeah, and I think the issue is stranded assets. If you ask them to get to BART level 2008 now, what the impact of that would be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you.
Scott Weaver could come on down. Any other board member questions? All right, we'll take our public commenters. Any other public commenters on this item? I only have one card. Go ahead, Scott.
All right, thank you.
It will be. There you go.
All right, Scott Weaver with Ramble. We're an environmental consultancy. We represent clients across all sectors potentially impacted by these rules. Our concern is that we don't believe these rules are ready for prime time. Specifically, it is unclear exactly who is subject to these rules right now. Staff had been telling the working group for the last several months that the facilities under the industry-specific category rules would not be covered. That's in fact what the draft rule language still says. We had been told that was going to encompass refineries, EGFs, metals sector facilities, and aggregate facilities. But then last week we were told to scratch the metals and the aggregate facilities in that list just out of the blue. So it seems to be a bit of a moving target exactly who's in this rule and who's not in this rule. Second,
Could you wrap it up, Scott? We're way past 30 seconds now.
Yeah, one more point. On cost effectiveness, with the extension of these BART standards to the former reclaim facilities, the district is obligated to demonstrate that these endpoints are cost effective before making such a determination, and the preliminary draft staff report released in January acknowledged that obligation and said that such an analysis was to be forthcoming in March. It has not yet been released. Therefore, it's unclear that this can be done cost effectively as is a requirement under the Health and Safety Code. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Any other commenters on this item? Tracy, you have any answers for any of those, or will you be reaching back out to him?
Yeah, in regards to the aggregate, so for the industry-wide categories, there's 4 industry-wide rules that we're considering: refineries, EGFs, metal melting processing facilities, and aggregate facilities. We've been clear in the rules that have been released in the 75-day notice that the EGFs and the refineries are excluded from 1146, 1146.1. And that the other 2 categories that we were still considering, but the rule language did not exclude those other 2 categories. And then we discussed at the last working group meeting that we've concluded that those other 2 categories can be incorporated into this amendment to 1146 and 1146.1.
Scott, if you have more comments, we have to take them offline. We got to keep moving. So no. Sir, thank you. So if you could reach back out with him and try and clear up some of that before it comes back. All right. Thank you. All right. Any other board member comments on this? Not hearing any, we're going to go on to item number 4 and dispense with that quickly so we can get this to the full body next month, and we have items to go from this to CARB. So if that's okay, then we'll skip to item 4 and then come back to item 3. Go ahead, Philip. Dr. Fine.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try to be fast given the time constraints we have, but this is an important program. This presentation is to provide the committee with an update on our activities related to AB 617, which was a legislation passed last year as a companion to the extension of the state's greenhouse gas cap and trade program that really focuses the local air districts and CARB on local community impacts. So staff has been hard at work at implementing this program and working with CARB, and this is just to provide a quick update, as well as there's a deadline approaching at the end of April that we have to make a submission to CARB, and we wanted to make the committee aware that we were doing that. So you all know the main components of AB 617, the BART requirements, the emissions data requirements, there's some penalty requirements, the money that came forth last year for the clean technology investments. But the two areas where the districts are going to have a long-term commitment and effort are the community air monitoring and the community emission reduction plans. And the first step in getting to that point is identifying the communities and prioritizing the communities that will be getting either community air monitoring or emission reduction plans, or both, with the ultimate goal of improving air quality in those communities. So staff has been working hard on this and working with CARB. We've developed a few principles that we're going by. Number one, this legislation requires us to prioritize disadvantaged communities disproportionately impacted by air pollution. We want to utilize the data and tools that we have to identify and prioritize communities in terms of our MATE studies and other things. And we have to go through a full public process. We want to incorporate public input to the extent we can. And this really is going to be a community-centered effort. And we want to prioritize communities where we know there's local sources of pollution and we know there's good work that could be done in terms of emission reductions. So we've done a lot of outreach just over the last 3 months, 5 AQMD-hosted community meetings and presentations to other groups that are out there who are invited to us, government agencies, other workshops, CARB presentations. So we've been out there getting the word out. When you look at the calendar, these mark all the outreach and presentations that have been done just over the last 3 months, and doesn't necessarily include some of the CARB meetings that have been done in parallel. There's been a lot of outreach and activity in this area in the South Coast. We have a website, we've developed infographics, we've had small group discussions at these, at the community meetings we're holding. We're having breakout sessions, we're having table discussions, getting input. And communities are doing self-recommendations in terms of the communities that they would like to see identified and prioritized. There's just some pictures here. I won't spend too much time on it. There's our infographic. And again, the first task, before we even get to monitoring, before we even get to emission reductions, is identifying communities and prioritizing communities. We have all our technical data that will help with that, but community input is key as well. So we've received a lot of input to date. I won't go into too many details here, but you can see that people have suggested different types of sources that we should be focusing on, different type of factors and criteria we should be looking at in terms of giving high priority or low or medium priority to different communities and the timing of implementation, and other types of demographic factors that go into the determination of disadvantaged communities, most of which are included, not all, but most of which are included in CalEnviroScreen, which is a statewide tool for identifying disadvantaged communities. We have our own data. We have our MATES study, our MATES 4 study. We are working on MATES 5. The data won't be ready yet for the first year, but this is a key point in identifying communities that are most impacted by air pollution. Again, with the findings being that about 2/3 of it comes from diesel particulate matter in terms of cancer risk, and about 90% coming from mobile sources. There's CalEnviroScreen, as I mentioned, the statewide tool that ranks by census tract communities based on demographic factors as well as environmental factors. And then there's a lot of different good information in CalEnviroScreen that incorporates a lot of the community input that we got. You have the different MATES, you have the air quality factors, and you also have, there's OEHA factors, there's MATES factors. There's some overlap there, and there's pretty good correspondence. So for community identification, so we're kind of dividing it into identifying communities, and then the work going forward will be prioritizing communities, because the first We can't even start doing ranking or scoring until we know what the communities are. We've taken community input on that, and CARB has asked us by the end of April to submit a list of communities. No ranking, no hard boundaries, but which communities are we considering? So that's why we came here today, to let you know that we're doing that and give you that list. We've looked at, when we're doing that, we don't want to leave anybody out. We want to be very inclusive. We're looking at any mates for area that has is in the top 25 percentile, any CalEnviroScreen area that's in the top 25 percentile, and the overlap. We're also looking at it whether it's one or the other. We've received many forms, about 31 forms through last week for self-recommendations. That's a factor.
How many? 31?
What's that?
31? That was it?
31 forms, but maybe a dozen communities.
Oh,
through
I would expect more. Okay.
And it's more since we got a few this week. Anyone who comes in and recommends their community, well, we're going to consider them. Right. They may not rank highly if they're not disadvantaged, but we will consider them. And then input we get just at meetings, even if they don't submit a form. And then we're also looking at other factors like density, population density, different schools within certain distances of sources. And then the idea of what is a community, it's not defined in the legislation, it's not being defined by CARB. We don't want to be the ones to define a community either, although at some point we do need to put some kind of boundary on it, but it's really based on community input. There's self-identification of communities, whether it's a neighborhood scale, city, geographical boundaries, political boundaries, known air quality issues, common air quality issues. These will all go into the factorization. So here's that preliminary list. I know we don't have a map yet. We purposely don't have a map because we don't know where the boundaries are yet. Right. But we're going to take, as best we can, these areas, there's about 55 to 60 of them, to start looking into mates and looking into CalEnviroScreen and seeing which ones are ranked higher by those metrics, add some other metrics as well, and then come up with a rough prioritization. We'll be coming back to the board before we have to submit to CARB in July. So again, we have to do this preliminary list that you just saw. We'll be sending it to CARB by the end of this month. We'll have a very short report of how we arrived at it, but it's very preliminary. It's subject to change. Communities can be combined, communities can be split up, taken off the list, added to the list. CARB just wants a sense of how many we're talking about. We'll continue to receive that input. We've told people try to get it to us by May 7th so we can integrate it into our subsequent report, which is actually going to have the prioritization. We'll have rankings for each community. This is not exact. This is just an example of what it may end up looking like. We'll have different factors across the top, different rankings within those factors, and then some way to come up with some weighting and overall priority. And then once we get that draft report, it'll be a whole other round of community outreach and get input on what we've come up with. We only have about a month to get that out on this time frame, which is very challenging. There's additional factors when we prioritize. It's not just those factors, right? It's whether there's local partnerships or local resources to help us implement, because we can't do this alone. We have to work with the community, we have to work with the cities, we have to work with the group, as well as current information and current studies that are already ongoing, like we have a Paramount, Compton, and other areas that we can roll into this program, that we can continue and add resources to, and then follow on with more formal community emission reduction plans. So that's going to play into the factorization, especially on the timing of when we implement. Here's some key milestones. I mentioned the preliminary list to CARB by April. The main thing is CARB has to, by state law, has to come up with this kind of first-year list by October, which means they have to go to their board in September, which means they need to prepare the materials a month before, which puts us at our July board meeting, where we will be presenting our recommendations to the board after going to stationary source and after doing another round of community input. With that, I'm not going to answer any questions.
That was the short presentation?
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
On the preliminary list that you submit to CARB on April 30th, is it going to be all of these communities, or are you going to narrow this list of the 60-some communities that are in your presentation?
For this preliminary list, we'd want to be inclusive. We want to consider everyone, we want to rank everyone, but we haven't done that yet. So we just want to tell CARB that this is everything under consideration. That's really all they've asked for. They didn't ask for any type of prioritization yet.
Okay, so all of those would be submitted
Yes.
in the list.
And,
Okay,
and
thank you.
potentially a few more or less over the next couple of weeks if we get a few more.
I see. Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Please go ahead.
This is Supervisor Solis. Yes, I just wanted to know, is April, the end of the month, a hard deadline for communities to participate or submit interest?
There's no hard deadline. This is a very preliminary list, so I wouldn't use April 30th as a deadline for the communities because that is just a preliminary list we're giving to CARB to give them a sense of where we are. We're trying to get community input by May 7th, although we'll obviously take it after that. And again, this list that goes to CARB is subject to change. So it's just checking that box that CARB wants to get a preliminary sense of how many we might be looking at.
Okay, I just want to bring to your attention, there's areas in unincorporated Los Angeles County that I know would probably need to be included, so we'll work with you on that.
Yeah, we're not necessarily using city boundaries, so it's more neighborhood or area and how communities kind of self-identify.
Right. Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, any other board member questions? And I don't have any public comment on this item unless someone put their card in the wrong pile. Anyone? All right. Thank you very much. With that, we'll move on to item number 3. Susan.
Good morning. Update on proposed amendment rule 1469. So we presented at the last Station Resource Committee meeting at the March, we tried to set hearing. 7 people testified. Board decided that they would like us to return to stationary source. We returned in March. 14 people had provided comments, and we didn't have time to discuss it, so we're following up here with the new items. So want to really underscore the need for proposed amendment rule 1469. We've done ambient testing, emissions monitoring at 5 facilities throughout the basin that are 1469 facilities. We have 40 of these heated sodium dichromate seal tanks that are well above the level that we've set for the proposed rule, over 300 times above that limit. These are hexavalent chrome emissions. This is a known human carcinogen. The rule will also address controls for 75 additional tanks, which we refer to as Tier 3 tanks. These are the high-emitting tanks. The rule establishes periodic monitoring, where the rule currently only has a one-time monitoring provision, building enclosure requirements, and enhanced housekeeping and best management practices. So in terms of the compliance dates for proposed amendment rule 1469, that there's a series of compliance dates, and the controls at the end of the day, it'll take about 2 to 3 years to install these pollution controls. Engineering, design, permitting, all of that goes in. We had to have a staggered schedule because there's so many facilities that are going to need to install pollution controls. Sorry, these my circles are messed up there. Ambient monitoring, we discussed this at the last Station First Committee. Staff is still committed to our proposed Rule 1480, which will address toxics. It'll be broader, not just hexavalent chrome, but other sources. We have proposed resolution language that we'd like to include that would have continued our commitment to Rule 1480, and then we would continue our monitoring near these 1469 facilities, and then consider monitoring within 1,000 feet of schools for 1469 facilities. In regards to schools and sensitive receptors, we want to maintain the requirement that we currently have in Rule 1469, proposed amendment Rule 1469, that if you have a building and an opening and you're within 100 feet of a resident or sensitive receptor, you need to close that side of the building. If you have, and we want to add a provision that if you're within 1,000 feet of a school and you have an opening on that side of the building, you need to close that side of the building. And we also had discussed at the last Station Resource Committee meeting that we're going to strengthen the provision for the trigger for a permanent total enclosure, that if it's instead of 2 times for failure to shut down a tank, when you have a failed slot velocity test or a smoke test, that it's a one-time failure if you're within 1,000 feet of a school. In terms of the non-toxic alternatives, we've discussed this at the last working group, Station Resource Committee meeting. that we would allow facilities, that there's provisions already embedded in the proposal for to address non-toxic alternatives. And then we'd like to also add some additional resolution language, and some resolution language was suggested by Dr. Lieu. So we would report to the Stationary Source Committee within 2 years on a pilot program. We conduct a technology assessment, report on the results of that, and if there's any changes that we would need in regards to how we can transition facilities and we can incorporate that into rulemaking, we would open up 1469. We would also...
Excuse me, real quick on that. I think another thing we need to be talking about is alternatives, maybe not non-toxic alternatives, but alternatives to how the tanks are set up, or alternatives to the processes. It might still be toxic, but they're just alternatives that are much cleaner and will actually get us to the same step, regardless of whether or not they're toxic. So it just seems like we're missing that part.
Yeah, and when we talk about sort of the alternative technologies, it would include any alternative. Even we've heard about like coating operations, so really outside of plating, but can somebody do coating instead of an actual plating operation? So we would be very broad and open-minded on those different alternatives. We would also include in the resolution our commitment to work with the state as they open up the air toxics control measure, support efforts to phase out hexavalent chrome at the state level, and also to seek funding for helping facilities transition out of hexavalent chrome and looking at these non-toxic alternatives. We talked at the last Stationary Source Committee in terms of the schedule for evaluating the chemical fume suppressants in the recertification process. Staff is committed to accelerating that time frame, so we would accelerate our commitment to finish up our analysis, emissions testing on the chemical fume suppressants 6 months earlier. We would scoot up the time for facilities to install controls 6 months, which actually works out to our 6 months plus their 6 months. A total of 12 months earlier to install pollution controls for those facilities, and still give that incentive for somebody that wants to move out of hexavalent chrome an additional year to go to a non-toxic alternative. We talked at the last Stationary Source Committee meeting about the European ban on hexavalent chrome. We've done a little more research on that and now have a better understanding about these. They refer to them as authorizations or exemptions. The authorizations are very broad, and when they refer to the functional decorative plating, it refers to also the finish, the color, that there's been exemptions not just for the military type applications, but also on the decorative chrome plating, automotive, for metal manufacturing, for a very broad number of different types of source categories. The exemptions also go upstream and downstream, so you can have someone that will apply for an authorization that can be a manufacturer of a certain chemical, and everyone downstream would also be exempt from use of that material. So wanted to highlight the key remaining issues in regards to industry concerns. The one area has been in regards to the building enclosures, and that they believe that some of the provisions that we have in the building enclosure requirements are not quantified and therefore should not be included in Proposed Amendment Rule 1469. So Proposed Amendment Rule 1469 and all rulemaking, as we go into the rulemaking, we take into account the industry that we're regulating. And so understanding that this industry does include some small businesses, the rule doesn't have as a base requirement a permanent total enclosure with negative air, which would be far more expensive than a building enclosure where you're putting in plastic flaps for doors, closing certain openings. But we do have provisions, because it's not a permanent toll enclosure under negative air, vented pollution controls, that we have requirements that they need to close, that they can't operate a device that's going to pull unfiltered air out of the building that's within 30 feet of a high-emitting Tier 3 tank. And we have evidence in regards to that we have emissions testing from vents that have fans that pull it out that have well over 3,000 nanograms per cubic meter. And just to give some perspective, it's like what we want to see at the ambient monitor. For the orders of abatement, we say an average of 1 nanogram. So the level that can come out of that vent, that can, if you have unfiltered air, that can land on the rooftop. We don't have the provisions in this rule for roof cleaning, for example, because we're trying to be cognizant of this particular industry and their ability to implement some of these more expensive provisions. As we move forward and we look at those provisions, it's like, in totality, the provisions, we refer to them as these make sense. We have quantification, we have information, but we think it doesn't make sense to have a device that's going to pull unfiltered air out of a building that has a high emitting chrome tank, even when it has pollution controls, because you're always going to have some fugitive emissions associated with that process. The other thing I wanted to highlight is the industry's concern in regards to the cost for the rule. We're almost finished with the socioeconomic analysis. The total annual cost for this rule is $6.8 million. Annual average per facility is about $40,000 to $60,000 per year. When we look at those these costs in regards to the building enclosure costs, it's a one-time cost, about $7,000 to $15,000. The $15,000 would be for a larger facility based on the square footage. In regard to the comments that we received from the community, we have received concerns that, two concerns, one being that there should be an immediate ban on the chemical fume suppressants, and the other is that the rule should just focus on non-toxic alternatives to hexavalent chrome, and that any installation of pollution controls would be stranded assets, and we shouldn't move forward with the rule. We should just find out what the alternatives are and push forward later in the rule. So our concern is that there's a number of tanks that are uncontrolled that even when you look at the European ban, it's not, there's no silver bullet in regards to the solutions for non-toxic alternatives, but we're open to evaluating, looking at that, and returning back to the board. Staff's recommending that we move forward, that we set the public hearing in May, but we're seeking input from the Stationary Source Committee from you in regards to how we proceed with the rulemaking.
Very good. All right. Any board member comments before I take our speakers?
Just a question. Susan, what did you say the cost per facility was per year?
So the annual average cost that we estimate is $40,000 to $60,000, and that includes the capital and operating and maintenance costs.
Average, okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Solis, do you have any other questions, or before we start with the public comment?
Yes, I'm more concerned in the presentation regarding the 115 tanks right now that we know are releasing hexachromium. So I know that's a health concern for many, and know how important that is. But I do want to say that with respect to our ability to actually capture and test fumes, that I think that's something that I would like to see us continually monitor to see how effective that equipment and capability really is. We can say we can quantify, but I would at some point still want to be kept abreast of how effective that is before we push it all out to everybody.
So just a point of clarification, when we talk about for the tanks and the pollution controls, there's a source test that can be performed, and we have good confidence in regards to what the emission reductions and the emissions associated with the tank when they put the pollution controls on, and we can test that. It's when you get to the fugitive emissions, you really need an ambient monitor to quantify that, and so that becomes a little bit more difficult. But in regards to your concern for the tanks, we can do emissions testing. The rule does require source testing, and it requires repeated periodic source testing.
And just a question on the little note you had on your presentation regarding that they found some residue on the roofs of these facilities. That's what, I guess concerns me in terms of how well we're going to be able to really contain this pollutant. Moving forward, I know that's going to be, is that cost that's incurred in the $40,000 to $60,000 annually that we're looking at?
It's incurred. Yeah, it's incurred in the cost in regards to the cost for the building enclosure requirements, where you have a device that's pulling air unfiltered, where they have to close that vent if it's within 30 feet of a Tier 3 tank. and other openings that are within 15 feet of a Tier 3, a high emitting tank, they'll have to close that vent too. They don't have to close up their whole building. We're just saying those particular vents that are near these high emitting tanks, that we need those vents to be closed.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Again, thank you all for coming today, and we'll try and go through this as quickly as we can, just so everyone get a chance to speak. We do have board members that have to leave at noon, so that's what I want to avoid. Hopefully we don't go past that. I've got probably about 50 cards here, 30 seconds each. That's 25 minutes if we can get to everybody 30 seconds. It never works that way. So please come on down, make your point. Again, thank you for being here. Dale Joaquin, Brian Liker, and then behind them, Lourdes Ortiz, and Justin Gussman. Go ahead, sir. Just state your name and then make your comment.
Dale Watkins with the Metal Finishing Association. Typically in these cases, I would like to open up with good morning. Today is not a good morning for us. Today is not a good morning for all of us, all of our families, and the thousands and thousands of other families and participants in small businesses in the metal finishing industry. So we are here to speak on a very large body of family owners, businesses, workers. A few things I want to bring up. These things that have been proposed, we cannot live with as it sits today. We need more time.
You're at 30 seconds, Dale.
We need to sit down with your staff, and we need to be able to negotiate these things.
All right.
$7,000.
If there's other people behind you.
$7,000 to $15,000 for an enclosure. $7,000 just for permitting from the city.
Fair to everybody else that wants.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Brian Liker, Executive Director, Metal Finishing Association of California. Today we're represented by many of business owners and employees, many of the 100 facilities that we represent. They're concerned about their jobs. They haven't been involved so far because they're working every day. They're very concerned. Today we have a petition, over 1,500 of their signatures, not just their signature, but their home address and their phone number. They're willing to tell their story. They're concerned about their job. We cannot live with this rule. It will lead to half this business going out of business or moving out of California. I've got also a letter from local elected leaders I'll leave with you today.
Thank you. Ms. Ortiz? And then Justin Gussman to the other microphone. Go ahead.
My name is Lourdes Ortiz, Human Resources and Safety Director for Quaker City Plating. During my 25 years of employment at Quaker, I have experienced a variety of challenges associated with the metal finishing industry, but never before have I experienced what we are experiencing today with the implementation of Rule 1469. I can see the lack of understanding of these rules, even by experts in the subject, the concern for the cost of the implementation, the potential of losing customers, and the fear from employees of losing their jobs.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Ortiz. Brian Ward can come to the next microphone. Dilip Patel. Behind him, Sam Bell, and then Bernie Moore. Go ahead.
Good morning. Justin Guzman, Aircraft X-ray Laboratories. I want to speak a little bit about freeboard. We did a study by dropping our solutions down 4 to 6 inches would impact about 18 or 20% of what we do. Unfortunately enough, these parts touch about 3 to 5 other departments. A gross loss would be about 30%, which would push us to laying off about a quarter of our workforce. So please be considerate of me, our company, and our industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Brian Ward, AAA Plating Metal Finishing Association. We're these numbers are not just ambiguous numbers. Last time that the AQMD, last time the AQMD did one of these 1469 rule revisions, 23 of at least our members of the Metal Finishers Association went out of business or left the state. That was, if you average 30 employees each, you can do the math. So those are real problems. The other thing is I just point to one thing. The Journal of the American Metal Association listed that people who have a dramatic loss in income, like a job loss, things like that, especially low-income individuals when they start out are 67% more likely to
Thank you for your
die in the
comments.
next 20 years. So that's a real health risk.
Thank you. Sir?
Dilip Patel from General Plating Company and Bright Plating Company. I'm plant manager. Propose a compressed air drying rule for Rule 1469. In metal finishing operations, employee will use compressed air to dry parts after final rinses in order to expedite operations. At this point in the process, any residual rinsed water on finished part will not contain chrome. Due to space constraint at our company, most likely many others, the construction of separation of 15-foot buffer zone around applicable chrome tank may not be possible for many platers.
Thank you for your comments. Sir?
Bernie Moore, Compliance and Training, member of the Board of Directors. CalEnviroScreen has a action level of 2,500 nanograms, which means an employee working inside one of these plating shops can have his head over the tank all day long, and as long as he doesn't exceed 2,500 nanograms, there's nothing that OSHA requires the facility to do. Now, what AQD is coming up with is 1 nanogram out in the environment, so it just doesn't, to me, make any sense to where an employee can have a greater exposure than somebody, 3 blocks away from the facility from a fugitive air emission.
Thank you for your comment.
Sam Bell, Metal Surfaces. This industry has been a major contributor to longer and better life. We can't fight motherhood and apple pie. However, this industry is the cornerstone of all manufacturing, from machines that make products from the forceps that used in birthing to dental tools that are used to make everyone's teeth clean. You're going after a very valuable industry and their jobs and the contribution to the economy. You are not using current health risk data. You don't have a handle on the other sources such as cement, yellow paint, or for roads or school buses. We recommend you do not require immediate, extremely costly controls on this industry now, but have OHIHA reevaluate the true contribution to the health risk first. We request that you delay the final rule until the current data is published.
Thank you for your comment. All right, next four is Ruben Angel, Jim Norton, Dan Cunningham, and Dan Zyman. Hope I didn't butcher all those too bad.
Yeah. Ruben Angel with Size Control Plating. I've been in this industry for 32 years. I have worked on the floor in industrial hygiene, occupational safety, environmental compliance, now production, and working for a small company, 11 employees, it really takes a lot of resources to indicate or generate the income to put $100,000 in this process. In delaying this regulation or looking at the real costs, very realistic costs, we're going to be able to see what we can do. But for our company, we are facing a very bleak future, short term. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Sir?
Jim Newton, Aircraft X-Ray Laboratories. I would like to address paragraph P4 in the proposed rule, which requires 1 hour notification for failed smoke test, failed source test, and breakdown of permitted amp hour limit. There's also Rule 430, which already requires these notifications. This is redundant, and I'd like to have that paragraph removed. This is an example of rush to propose or to promulgate this rule, and I'd like to have it removed.
Thank you for your comment.
Hi, Dan Cunningham with Bowman Plating Company in Compton. I've been in this industry for 38 years. In fact, I was executive director of this association for 18 years. This is a very vital industry to Southern California, and since 1988, we've reduced our chrome emissions, hexachrome emissions, by over 99.5%, and that's CARB and AQMD numbers. In fact, we've won 2 Clean Air Awards, this association, from the district for the work we've done. So please listen to the employees and maybe consider making the make sense provisions best management practices or suggestions instead of putting them in the hard, fast rule.
Thank you for your comment.
Dan Zinman, Metal Finishers Association of Southern California. We're all concerned about health, safety, environmental for ourselves, our family, the community. Please look at the most recent and accurate and latest data on Chrome, and I think you'll see that we're well in and want to be in compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Juan Centero, Jim Meyer, Mike Pertaras, Frankie Riviera. Your name?
Morning. I'm here for representing EME and my coworkers. I just want to say that, you know, we're concerned.
And what was your name for the record? Sorry?
Juan.
Juan? Go ahead. Thank you.
I just want to say I'm here for EME and I'm here for support of my coworkers, our employees. And I just want for you guys to reconsider and those rules. We're all worried about our jobs, our families, and our future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim Meyer, Aviation Repair Solutions. The aviation industry used to be centered here in the heart of Southern California. 50,000 people used to work at Long Beach Douglas Aircraft Company. We're down to maybe 1,000 now. When you and your kids fly to Orlando, you pray that the landing gear and the thrust reversers work on that airplane. They're made of chrome, and it's necessary that we maintain those aircraft for the next 30 years because the aircraft is going to last for another 30 years.
Thank you.
I believe you said Mike Pilatus, that's the name.
Yeah, there you go.
A previous commenter discussed the loss of business volume if finishers have to lower their tank levels because the solution, the envelope is smaller. They won't be able to fit enough parts in there or the same size of parts. The paragraph D4 requirement to do just that, though, regulate freeboard heights, there's no requirement for it. There's no reason to do it. With increased monitoring provisions of this rule, exceedances will be identified very quickly if they occur. Corrective actions may include, among other things, reducing freeboard height in a given tank. However, in the absence of any empirical data that's presented by the AQMD, which links lowered freeboard heights on emissions levels, there's no data-driven basis to impose that increased freeboard height. So I recommend that you don't have that provision in that rule.
Thank you.
My name is Frank Rivera. I'm representing EME. And in this industry, we're pretty important to the DoD, Department of Defense. And we have to do work for Boeing, our prime contractors, and we have to meet the requirements to do our work. So by you guys not letting us meet the requirements, we can't do their work and they can't get their work done. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Stephen Good, Richard Salazar, Ruben Salazin. What do you think there? Vince Grana, Grana. Go ahead. Your name?
Stephen Good, and I'm representing the metal workers of Southern California. And to my understanding, they're using science that is, using your terminology, Madam Chairman, ancient, and also not even pertaining to air. And I really would implore you guys to start using the real science that will actually back up. And like what Bernie was saying, it's only about even a nanogram that's getting out in the environment, and now we're starting to have to regulate ourselves to something that is absolutely preposterous in terms of actual science. So please start using real science and push away the agenda and also the sensationalistic justice that's being pushed across right now. Thank you.
Excuse me. My name is Vince Grana, California Electroplating, Penetrate Metal Processing, also a member of the Metal Finishers Association. We employ 70 employees in the city of Los Angeles. We are interested in getting, on 1469, getting a better science, like the gentleman said. We do decorative chrome and we do trivalent chrome, and we've been in business since 1915. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, Richard Salazar, and then RAWI scratch. I'm not sure that, and it's Salazin, Salazn. If not, we'll move on. Alan Orlick, Jesus Padilla, Caroline Padilla. Got a couple winners there. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Olick. I'm president of General and Bright Plating Company and a member of the Metal Finish Association for about 30 years. I once worked at 1928 Jewelry. We had up to 1,200 people. They're gone. I also worked at Price Pfister Water Faucet in Pacoima and in Mexico. They're gone. Everybody's leaving. Everybody's being forced to leave. My company employs 100 people, a lot of families, a lot of subcontractors. The science is not science, and negotiated rulemaking is not negotiated rulemaking. We never got to negotiate. The rules have been driven down our throat with a pitchfork. They hurt. They're killing us, our employees, and jobs, thousands of jobs. We're all very upset. This is upsetting to be up here speaking and being told after we take all this time off of work that we're allowed 30 seconds. I've been a taxpayer all my life. I've never collected anything. We've only given. We've given jobs in our life.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it.
And we haven't killed anybody, and we don't plan on it.
Thank you.
My name is Jesus Padilla. I represent Chromium Plating Company. We are 35 workers there. I have been working there for 38 years. The proposed Rule 1469 is going to affect my job and my work condition for the worse. Thank you.
Thank you. Caroline Padilla? Maria Guarestano, a better idea on that one. Joe Lipsy Jr., James Perez. Yeah. Maria Garnadino, maybe? Aircraft X-ray Lab. Your name?
Good morning. My name is Joe Lipsy Jr. I represent EME and the Metal Finish Association. I've been in Metal Finish Association for 31 years, and the rules and the science that you came up with, I understand the science, but the numbers are not really science, because some of the numbers, I understand the $40,000 to $60,000. That's the estimate, but estimate for who? Estimate who went out and got the estimate. And the number she gave, is there anybody that double-checked her number that's in charge of her? That's all the question I asked.
Part of our rulemaking process is that the rule goes for an outside economic evaluation, and it'll come back to us at the full rulemaking when we have the final rulemaking with the whole board. So, good question. Go ahead.
My name is James Perez, represent Aircraft X-ray. I'm an employee at Aircraft X-ray, and with this rule, it's jeopardizing my career in this industry, which as a young adult, I want to go forward with this industry and learn more, but with this rule, that it might jeopardize my future in that, and also young adults that want to take this path in this industry. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, one last time. Maria E. Cordano from Aircraft X-ray Lab, Caroline Padilla. After that, Ryan A. Resgo, Tordino C. Gonzalez, Alberto Hernandez, Krush H. Patel. Sir?
My name is Raul Riesco. I'm a local resident here nearby in La Habra. And I have a concern here because in today's LA Times, it indicates that the Los Angeles Board of Harbor Commissioners has unanimously approved the permit for Space Exploration Technologies to build their rocket and spaceship system here.
Yep.
And this is the industry that does this. And we'd like to take this into consideration and keep local jobs here local.
Good comment. Hey, whoa. No, we won't have clapping because then that'll just disrupt everybody. If you like what he says, you can put your hands up, okay? So, and I know I'm being curt. I know I'm trying to move this along. It's so that everybody gets a chance to speak before we start losing board members to other meetings. So thank you again for being here. Sorry we have to keep this short. Sir, your name?
Oh, my name is Kasiram Patel. I'm working with a General and Bright Plating Company. I'm working in plating company since 41 years. And then I have worked with the 1,200 employees with the same thing, chrome plating, continuously for 41 years. And just like with thinking that one, without taking all opinion from us, you guys just like behaving us as a criminal. We're creating the job and we're helping the society in so many ways, and still the rules and regulations they are putting so way that we are ruining the whole industry, and just like we are criminal, and they want to put on in prison also too. That is a bad thing. They have to take our opinion and they have worked with us because we are producer, so we have to work with us also. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and that's definitely not my intent. And what was your name again, sir? Hey, did you catch his name? Natalie? Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Hello. My name is Edberto Hernandez. I'm working for Bright Plating, General Plating, for almost 38 years old. I mean, 38 years old. And I've been working with the Hexavalent 38 years. And I'm here because I want my job. I support my family, and I haven't heard anybody dying from cancer. So I just here for you to know, we need these jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Turdino C. Gonzalez, Walter Rodriguez, Cesar Valesco, Vincent Noonan. Go ahead, you got there first, just go right ahead.
Hi, my name is Walter Rodriguez, representing Chromium, the quality control manager here, and I just don't know what to tell my employees if we do have to close shop. Like, that's 30-something employees with all single-income families, and then, they've been here 2-3 generations, and we just have to close shop now if we can't afford to keep the shop open. It's not fair. So, thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
My name is Trinidad Gonzalez. I started working in 1977. And I'm working behind the chrome tanks all the time. I never get sick. I got an employee working for 40 years. Fortunately, he don't come today. He should come today to talk to you. We want our jobs. We got everything. We got families. We got support our families. Please support us too. We support everybody too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, my name is Cesar Velasco. I'm from Aircraft X-Ray. Yeah, I've only been there for 2 years, but I see a lot of growth in that company. I love what I do. There's parts we have, about lowering those tanks. There's parts we have that won't fit in those tanks, pass to 2 or 3 departments. If we lose those parts, we might lose my job, can't support my family, and poverty is another form of, pollution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vincent Noonan, Metal Finishing Association of Southern California. 2 very quick points. The numbers need to be reviewed for total enclosures. $15,000 is not even close. Some businesses that are not even worth $1 million will have to close because they won't be able to afford this. Second point, the jobs that we provide to the community are for those that may not make it to a 4-year college. They may not make it to a post-secondary education. These jobs are very needed in this community, and we'd like you to consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Stevens. My company is Bridge Safety Consultants. I'm an independent safety consultant who's been...
Joe, did I call your name?
It's in there somewhere. I wasn't sure whether you have the card or not.
Okay, well, let me get through all the cards, and we'll call them up as we go. All right. Claudia Martinez, Charles Bell, Joe Stevens, Roger Sanchez. Hey, Joe, there you are. Have the cards for a reason, okay? Go ahead, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Claudia Martinez. I'm representing EME. I've worked there for 20 years. I'm the final inspector. We're 100 employees depending on metal finishing companies. How would your rules and regulations affect our families and jobs?
A little premature, but here we go. So I'm an independent safety consultant, worked with all sorts of industries for more than 15 years. There is no industry that cares as much about safety, the safety of its employees and the environment, as the Metal Finishing Association. I urge you to hold off on the implementation of this rule until more current studies can be done. What you don't want to do is drive prosperous companies that provide jobs and services in this industry. You don't want to drive them out of business and drive people up to the unemployment rolls. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Good morning. Roger, Pico Rivera Plating in the city of Pico Rivera. Been working in Pico Rivera Plating for close to 40 years. And as a gentleman mentioned that I've been around plating tanks for a little more than half of my entire life. And I'm in one piece. I haven't fell apart. It is important to consider we have thousands and thousands of families that will be suffering out of this such a great rule that you guys came up with. Understand that California is losing business right and left. Help us out, work with us, because we work with you guys each and every single day. Somebody's getting paid because of everybody. Have a great day.
Charles Bell, Metal Surfaces. We've been in Bell Garden since 1960. We're a general plating shop. We've been the employers of 130 plus or minus people for 58 years plus. We're part of and proud to be part of the aircraft and military defense industrial complex, I'll call it, that's developed here in Southern California. We don't want to lose that. A concern I have is discussion on these alternate non-toxic procedures or productions that we all agree. We'd like to have the environment cleaned up in Southern California. However, we're a job shop. We have to produce to what our customers want, including the military.
Thank you for your comments, and we understand that's a grave issue. All right. Raymond Dubon, D-U-B-O-N. Masad Akari. Brad Keir. Yvonne Watson. I know Yvonne's here.
Good morning. My name is Ramon Dubon. I represent Size Control Plating, and my company's been in the city of La Puente for about 40 years, and I don't see no complaints around the community around there. And one thing I can say to you guys that if all these companies that will move out of California, what are you guys gonna do about it? You guys not gonna have any jobs also, right? It's just like us losing our jobs. So reconsider your lives. Thank you.
Thank you. Yvonne?
Hi, my name is Yvonne Martinez Watson. I am the chair of the Environmental Justice Committee for the Sierra Club Angeles chapter. I am also an unpaid volunteer and a victim of air and water pollution in an environmental justice community. We're asking you, we as a committee, we really do care about both workers and the public and the health and safety of both. We'd like to remind you about what happened with Exide, where regulatory agencies failed both the workers and the community. We ask you to please consider the safer alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brad Kerr, father of 3, 2 grandchildren, conscientious supplier of restricted chemicals as well as wastewater treatment and disposal. I have seen this industry change much in the last 40 years. However, today you see before you people that are very much aware of the implications of these restrictions this agency has proposed for our industry. It will be disastrous. We have fought competition from Asia, Mexico, and neighboring states, but don't have the cost restrictions that we do, addressing alternative technology. It is the Boeings, the Airbuses, and the DoD that put these chemicals in our restrictions. And these functional deposits, these companies and government agencies have approved alternatives that will take years. Please stop this hysteria. Consider the facts.
Thank you for your comments.
Good morning. My name is Masood Akabi. I'm from Bowman Plating Company. I'm not going to touch on matters which has already been discussed. I just wish to bring to your attention the fact that we use hexavalent chromium with all its challenges is a requirement of the United States military. So I think an entity such as SCAQMD should really deal with the matter with the federal government instead of putting us out of use of it, which would then, it would allow others in other states to go ahead. I urge you to push back the the requirements as much as possible so there would be a better understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, my last three cards here. Robina Sisfall, SYV or SYWOL, Jane Williams, Jeffrey Blank.
Hi, Rabina Sewell, Executive Director of California Safe Schools. We know that there are dozens of schools and residents that are located within feet of these facilities, and they're mostly in environmental justice communities. Allowing windows and doors to be open is completely unenforceable without monitoring and sufficient number of inspectors, and unconscionable knowing what we know about the toxicity of these chemicals that are used. There are alternatives. Children and families walk by these facilities daily. Please protect their health, the health of students, and the health of our workers. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think it's still morning. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. The major point I want to make, and I'm so glad the workers are here today, is that we have raised very serious concerns about the use of the fume suppressants. The fume suppressants are actually more toxic than the hexavalent chromium. They are more toxic than PCBs. And these are the new fume suppressants, not the old ones. There's a meeting in 2 weeks in Washington, D.C., because we've got contaminated groundwater all over the United States with these perfluorinated chemicals. We've said we will not support a rule that relies on these fume suppressants. Almost all of the facilities in South Coast use these fume suppressants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Blake with the Metal Finishers Association. The existing air control systems that are currently installed some 20, 25 years ago are still testing well below the latest emission limits. There's a proposed performance testing in the new regulation that will cost each company $15,000 to $20,000 or more, and originally it was proposed to be every year. Now it's proposed to be every 3 years. So spending hundreds of thousands of dollars that provides no improvement seems to be not the right way to go. We want the opportunity to work with Dr. Joe Lieu and develop a comprehensive operation and maintenance program similar to what's in Title V companies using process hazard analysis. This improves the process on an ongoing basis.
Thank you for your comments.
Let's spend the money to get results.
Thank you. I'm going to go through these last four cards again, just in case I missed out earlier. Robin Salazan, S-A-L-A-Z-N. Richard Salazar. Corleen Padilla. Maria Grantarno. Felipe Aguirre. All right, Felipe.
Hi, good morning. My name is Felipe Aguirre. I work in the city of Maywood, and I wish that I could have brought a couple of my friends along that have been severely affected medically by chrome platings. I couldn't bring them because I can't put their wheelchairs in my car. But next time I will promise I will bring them so you can see what happens to people that work at these companies for many, many years. There had been some of these rules back when they were working. They wouldn't have to take an early disability. So I really ask your committee to adopt the most stringent rules available, because we know that everybody can be affected differently by the environment, and we've seen them in our communities in the southeast of LA. We have a lot of people that are walking wounded.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you very much.
Caroline Padilla with Guardian Specialized Processing. I wanted to, besides the fact that a lot of jobs are going to be affected by this rule, just note everything around us is coded, from the pins we're using, from the cameras that we're being recorded on. Everything has a coding, and the fact that you want to drive this out of California, it's going to affect California. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's my last speaker on this item. Oh, did I miss you?
Oh, good morning. You didn't miss me. I just I didn't realize we were putting in cards. And so, good morning, Bill Pierce, the Boeing Company. Just wanted to make, the district has our comments, so I won't go into those specific details, but I wanted to make a quick comment on staff presentation, just as you're crafting board resolution language and the use of the term non-toxic. Even our replacement programs, such as boric sulfuric or thin film sulfuric, even those are considered probably toxic.
I don't know if you heard my comments earlier, but I made that comment to staff during their presentation because I agree with you.
So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We usually don't do comment cards, so that's why he's here almost every meeting. I want to thank all of you for being here today. Again, I appreciate you coming out today, and I'm sorry we had to rush through this, but I've got to get this over by noon. Questions for staff? Board colleagues?
Well, I don't know this is a question. We've heard a lot of comments this morning, some of which we've heard before, but we haven't seen all of you before. We have had a few representative people come to our town hall meetings and to our committee meetings. What I would say today is that the agency has historically worked pretty carefully with industry to fashion a rule that works for the industry and also for the environmental community. This is a classic case where the agency is balancing jobs and economy on the one side with environmental impacts and health issues on the other side. So what I think today, after hearing all of you come and speak, is that we're not there yet. I would ask our staff to continue working on this rule with the Metal Finishers Association. And I think it would be a good idea to select a few of your key representatives to have that working group. Our staff probably has done some of that already, but even though you have done it, I think there's more to be done based on what we've heard here today. So I would emphasize that. And some of the issues that have come out are the cost of the changes that are required by the rule. That had to do with tank volumes. The cost of enclosures. Some of these operations are really small, so we're not sure, what the cost impacts will be to the small ones. I think what the committee and the board will need to know is, to the extent that we can evaluate what the impact is on jobs, let's do that. It may be hard, but some of the smaller operations, let's look at those. But some of these are 100 employees, and I have a concern about those entities. Fume suppressants. What if they don't use fume suppressants? What's the alternative? You're going to weigh here. Is it better with fume suppressants or without? And fume suppressants seem to be worse than nothing. I'd like more information on that as we're working on this. And I know you have in the rule a reevaluation, recertification of fume suppressants. But what is the alternative to that? The industry that we're talking about here has an impact on aviation, aerospace, military defense operations. We need to take that into consideration also. And a number of people talked about the science. Are we using the right science? So just a review of that. Make sure that our science is correct. You talked about the standards that we're using and comparison of those standards with OSHA. So I know that we have gone over some of that before, but I think these are issues that were raised today. So I would not set this for hearing in May yet. We have had complaints on both sides of this balancing weight that we're looking at. We've had complaints from the environmental groups. They want us to phase out hexavalent chromium completely and go to alternatives. We've seen that that probably can't happen at this point in time, although I'm very supportive of industries looking at other alternatives and finding things that are less toxic than hexavalent chromium. It may not work for every operation, but it may be good for some of the operations, and would want to encourage those companies and those processes that can use a less toxic process to go that route. So these are my thoughts right now, and I don't know where other people on this committee stand, but I'm putting my opinions and my issues out there on the table.
Hey, no clapping, no clapping. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Supervisor.
Yes, I want to thank my colleague because much of what she said I agree with, because I am concerned that we're getting information from both sides that aren't in agreement with this rule as it stands now, and we do need more time. I'm particularly concerned also about the fume suppressants. If they are more hazardous, I want to know what information can help to clarify that issue that was raised by one of the individuals that spoke. And then also, I am concerned about small business, if there's any way to incentivize creation of a fund or something to help with the transition, if in fact this is the route we're going to go, particularly for small businesses with less than 100 employees. In some cases, the county looks at 25 and less. So I think we ought to be thinking realistically, but I'm also very concerned about the health impacts in the surrounding community as well as with the employees, the workforce. So those are my concerns, and I would concur if this isn't ready to go, we should hold off.
Well, I agree with both of you on a lot of these comments. One other one that I heard a couple times was the freeboard height, and I'd like to know where we got the idea that that would make a big difference or what science is behind that recommendation. I think we've got a lot of questions here, and I agree that moving forward at this point will be very difficult. So, staff, you've heard all that from us. Do you have some comments you'd like to give back to us, or?
So, Chairman, if I could just take a moment, I just want to explain why staff's recommendation is to move forward while it seems like nobody wants us to move forward in any of the testimony. So just to take a step back, as you know, we went into the community of Paramount and we found very high levels of hexavalent chromium. There were 300 times background, cancer risks that we have not seen before, based on OEHA's guidance, the same guidance that the entire state has to use in assessing risk. We identified certain areas at these platers that heretofore were unknown as sources of hex chrome. There's certain tanks that are completely uncontrolled that we found, not at one facility, but several facilities that were significant sources of hex chrome to the community. We also found practices or housekeeping issues that were significant sources of hex chrome to the community. It's not really in dispute. We have evidence, we have measurements to show that. Staff feels very strongly that those issues need to be taken care of as soon as possible because we think they are occurring not just at the facilities we've tested at, but throughout the basin at multiple facilities, because the percentage of facilities we tested was very high that had these issues relative to all the facilities we tested, almost everyone. So the recommendation to move forward is to get a handle on those known sources that need to be addressed as soon as possible, and any delay is a delay in implementation of controls and more risk to the community. We've had 11 working group meetings over a year and a half. The rule language has been changed substantially through negotiation, through those working group processes. We have done everything we can to reduce costs to the maximum extent possible while still providing protection to the community. There's no new building enclosures that we think need to be built now. We're just talking about taking existing enclosures and tightening them up a little bit. We'll refine the costs going forward, but we think we have a pretty good estimate. On the other side, the issues of the non-PFAS fume suppressant, the issues of the alternatives, we agree these issues need to be addressed. Those issues cannot be addressed today at the board meeting in June, really cannot be addressed any time in the next 1 or 2 years. These are complicated issues. They're going to take a lot of testing. If we have to wait for that, that's a 2-year delay on any of the controls that could potentially go on, which staff believes is too long for what we've found. The claim that the non-PFAS fume suppressants are more toxic than hexachrome is not substantiated. We have seen no evidence of that. There's a lot of work to be done in that area. We need to look at exposure. We need to look at the toxicity. We have pathways in the rule to move towards and incentivize alternatives and assess alternatives, and we have pathways in the rule to deal with the non-PFAS fume suppressant issue, but we cannot do that in a short period of time. That's why staff believes that we need to move forward to get these controls on. We've been in communities, we've found these problems, we have commitments to fix them, not just in those communities, but everywhere. And any delay is going to delay the reduction of hexachrome.
Mr. Chair?
And we have a whole list of specific clarifications from what we heard today. We probably don't have time for it today. If you had any questions, Susan can go into that.
Just a second, Supervisor. I see Susan has comments she wants to add to that. Go ahead, Susan, and we'll
So
come back to Sleeve.
I just wanted to clarify just really quickly on a number of the comments that were made. So we heard comments that in regards, they didn't know about the working group meetings. We had 11 working group meetings, sent out 450 emails for each of these working group meetings. Working group meetings were, many of them were 2 to 3 hours, some 4 hours long. So in terms of working with the industry, rolling up our sleeves, we worked through each of the issues. In regards to facilities moving out of our basin or out of the state, our rule, the federal NESHAP, which is the chrome plating NESHAP, mimics proposed amendment rule 1469. So you move out of our state, you're still subject to requirements that are similar to the existing 1469. I think it's expected that the provisions in our rule will be incorporated into the ATCM and also into the federal NESHAP. In regard to the issue of the freeboard ratio, we have modified that provision a number of times. And so the current proposal is that if you do not, the concern was that if you had an automated line that you'd have to dip, you'd have to change your whole automated line if you had to change one tank in the freeboard. So we modified that provision that if it's an automated line and you're changing one tank, that you're not subject to the freeboard ratio. However, if you change your whole entire line, then you need to modify your freeboard ratio at that time. The freeboard ratio is consistent with industrial ventilation guidelines in regards to the height of the freeboard for a tank and how it should be designed. In regards to the comment for the CalOSHA requirement for 2,500 nanograms per cubic meter, that is not based on for cancer risk. That's a non-cancer health effect. The health endpoint in terms of the concern for hexavalent chrome is for cancer. That is the driver whenever we look at health risk from hexavalent chrome. And so the number will be lower because of the cancer risk is so much higher of a risk compared to the non-cancer health effects. In regards to the comment for Rule 1430 and breakdowns, Rule 1430 does not apply to Rule 430 does not apply to toxic air contaminants. So Rule 1469 in a breakdown and a call and relying on that rule would not be applicable. So that's why we have the provision in our rule to notify us. In regards to the permanent total enclosure, that's a triggered requirement. There have been a number of provisions throughout the rulemaking process where we've taken very high cost items off the table. One of them being the permanent total enclosure, vented pollution controls. That's a triggered requirement. A facility that can't pass a source test 2 times in 48 months, or a facility that fails to shut down a tank after they know that they failed a smoke test, a slot velocity test, is a facility that we believe needs to put on a permanent total enclosure with negative air. So bringing in that high cost, no. We're talking about low cost, plastic flaps, closing a door, things that are very simple for a facility to implement. So,
Supervisor Solis?
Thank you. Appreciate the staff responding to some of the questions that were raised, but my concern goes to, of the 115 tanks that we know now that are spewing hexavalent chrome, I understand that there are 40 that really we're at risk because they are producing more than 300% of what's allowable. Why can't we perhaps look at establishing criteria where we go after the most serious factories or plants here and begin to work in a phased-in system, and then work slowly on an incremental basis to get the others to come on board, or to make those appropriate changes and adjustments, and helping us better understand also what the appropriate fuel suppressants are, and also giving us time to work with some of the smaller businesses who would be most impacted immediately. I mean, I agree that the urgency of health is of great concern to some of us, and it is to me, but I think maybe staff could think about maybe bifurcating some of this in a way that we can have a phased-in system. Thank you.
So the rule does, in terms of the focus of the rule, is on the high chromium emitting tanks, and there's 115 of those tanks that need pollution controls. And so the total number of facilities is 65 facilities. So, and also it's like in terms of the periodic source testing, there was a comment that we went from 1 year to 3 years. And then we also added a provision that a facility that can maintain their correct parameter monitoring on their pollution controls, they can go to once every 4 years. So there's been much from staff. I think we've more than halfway met industry in regards to looking at, provisions that can help them out, but still maintaining a rule that will be health protective.
And sorry if I could just, Philip Fine again. I think the concern is that, I understand the direction to work with industry and try to come. We have done that for 18 months. I think one of staff's concern is that we're never going to get there. We're never going to get to that place of consensus. Yeah, we could make some small changes still on one side or the other, but we don't foresee a way to come to the board with a rule where we're going to have all sides agreeing to it. So in some cases, we just have to do the best we can to balance everything and bring that to the board.
Any last comments, Wayne?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As it's been described, we've worked with a number of the groups. We've worked with representatives of the groups that we've heard from today. We've heard from both sides, and clearly both sides aren't happy. Staff has taken the very difficult task of looking this from a very objective perspective. When we hear, for instance, that the fume suppressants are more harmful than the hexchrome, show us that data. We haven't seen that data. That's why within the proposed rule, we're saying, let us look at that. We recognize that EPA is looking at this issue. We know it's an important issue. By the same token, so is the exposure to hexchrome. We know that the fume suppressant issue is really not an issue associated with the plating. It's an issue where that additive has been used in firefighting operations and where it has been deposited into groundwater, surface waters. That's not what we're talking about. And that's why staff has taken the objective position of, let's evaluate that. Let us come back to the board and determine, is there really exposure from the fume suppressants? And if there is, we would be the first ones to say, then we need to stop using that. But we need the data to support the recommendation and the decisions that we're making and presenting to you. If we don't have that data, we're not going to make that presentation. We're not going to make that assumption, and we're not going to make the conclusion. So there are a number of data gaps that we've identified. There are a number of areas where other agencies, for instance, the European Union, may be further ahead of us, but we know that they're also taking measures that allow for certain exemptions and waivers. And is that really the way that we want to go? Do we want to just say something, or do we want to do something? And staff is saying we need to do something about this. Could we do other things? This all came about, as you heard, and as you know intimately, from the monitoring work that we had done in the communities. And we've heard from the communities. We've heard the communities want to have these protections put in place. The protections that you've heard described, we believe, are reasonable. There are other mechanisms that would also be available to people, whether it be through the hearing board, whether it be through ongoing reporting back from staff to the board with regards to progress in the implementation of how it's turning out. But from our perspective, the longer we delay, the longer the exposures are within a community. And if you're dealing with cancer and you're dealing with the exposure from hexavalent chrome, then we need to deal with it. And we're not dealing with it in the way that we would normally do, which is through this expedited rulemaking process. And it really hasn't turned out to have been that expedited. So we urge your consideration. Obviously, staff wants to see this move forward. We were talking about set hearing. We still have the opportunity to have further discussions before this comes before the board. Even if we were to move forward today for set hearing in May, that would still go to the board in June. But by not moving forward, there's a good chance we may not get to this until the end of the year or even next year. And then what is the cost?
So let me understand that about the fume suppressants. If we take fume suppressants out of the rule, what does that do?
Well, if you don't have fume suppressants, and let me back up a second, the fume suppressants are actually used by the smaller facilities. Fume suppressants is a way to keep the hex chrome from being emitted into the air. Larger facilities will have the air pollution control equipment. They won't necessarily use those fume suppressants. So the intent of the fume suppressants is to keep the hexavalent chrome emissions down to protect the workers. If we take away the fume suppressants, there's no protection from the hexavalent chromium. And that's why we were proposing to do a study on the fume suppressant use. That's why we wanted to come back. We originally had said 2 years for that because that's what staff originally felt. At the urging of the board, at the urging of community members and others, we believe we can get that down to 18 months. There's been a tremendous desire for us to get that down to 12 months. I can tell you that we will do it as quickly as possible, but we will not compromise the science. We will not compromise our ability to have factual and useful information. We believe that'll take 18 months. If by chance we're able to get it sooner, great. And we'll be able to report back on that. And if that information comes back and it justifies not using fume suppressants, then we can move forward to eliminate its use. But we can do it in a way that provides the users time to move forward. We know that there are efforts underway right now with the legislature to provide funding to move forward move away from hex chrome. And I've committed to continue to work with the legislature to help support that. So we can continue to work on looking at other alternatives while the rule is progressing. We can continue to provide protections to communities in a more enhanced way that they're currently not experiencing.
How many facilities are using fume suppressants? You said these are for the smaller ones.
65.
How many, Susan?
65 total facilities have the other tanks.
We have, I stand corrected, the number is
65.
How many staff members does it take to answer it?
27 exclusive, but there's others that are used in conjunction. So if we get to the total, 65.
65, right the first time, okay. Well, one of the things I think is that, I mean, there is this urgency to take care of it. When we first discovered these really high levels of hexavalent chromium in Paramount in October of a year ago, was it a year and a half ago? Let's see, where are we now? About a year and a half ago.
A year and a half ago.
It was pretty alarming. And we've done a lot already to work on this rule and bring it forward. What I would suggest is to go ahead and have this heard by the board in June. In the meantime, we've heard from a lot of the workers in the Metal Finishing Association today. I would like you to continue to work with them. These people are workers. They go to work every day. They can't come to the working group meetings, but that is why I suggested, and maybe you have, I know you've worked with some of their representatives, but from some of the people we've heard today, maybe you haven't heard from them before. So I you know, when we work on a rule, we like everybody to come to the table and finally agree, but we recognize that not everyone will agree. There'll always be some differences. In a way, that's a sign of success. Nobody's happy. But I think, you know, there's some issues raised today that I want the staff to work with people that have come today and further explanation, further discussion on some of those issues I think would be useful. And because of the urgency of the health issues involved in the cancer risk, I go ahead and set the hearing and have it heard in June. We can change that. I mean, if it comes to us and, hey, there's a lot of loose ends, we're not ready yet, that can be changed again. We've set this hearing a couple of times, so that's where I think we ought to be. The other thing I want to say is, and our executive officer mentioned it, is I would like staff to come back to us 6 months from now. I mean, after the hearing is set, and depending on where we go with that. And I think this committee would like to see the progress on implementing this and what the impacts are. The other thing is, you mentioned in your, that we'll continue to study other alternative processes other than hexavalent chromium. And you set that out 2 years. For me, that's like way too long to wait to hear back. I know there's work ongoing right now with other processes. So by that same token, in 6 months, when we're hearing back on the implementation, I'd like to hear about what studies have, what's come out with other kinds of processes that are not using hexavalent chromium. There may be some advancements in Europe, or the company we heard from, which was Chromium, they have a process that they use TCP, and I know some of our metal companies are like that process, that they think that is a good alternative. But where is that in the mix? I understand military outfits, OEMs may not accept that, but you know, there may be some progress there on better process that's safer for everybody.
My understanding of the 2 years, I heard from a gentleman who was here today that mentioned that it takes almost 2 years to get Boeing to change their process or their allowable processes, so that could be part of that. But I think coming back periodically, not just at the end of 2 years, obviously, but 6 months and a year, and so we can hear what's going on in that field will be helpful. Supervisor Solis, did you want to add to that?
I very much agree. I think that we should be looking at the alternatives that are being used now, like Trivalent and other substitute chemicals instead of hexachromium. And I think we should work with the legislature very closely on moving that forward and try to find out how we can get incentives to do that conversion. And I am very concerned about the 65 areas that are potentially spewing a large number of hexachromium into the surrounding area. So that is a big concern for us, and I have to remind folks that we do have a board of supervisors who represents the community of Paramount, who's very, very concerned about this issue, and that isn't going to go away. And I do feel that we need to work on this, but I want to see that we also do a better job of explaining what the health impacts are. I don't believe everyone in the audience fully understands why the need is so necessary for us to take action. And if we could spell that out more clearly in the community as well as the folks that are on the working group, I think that can help us. And if that means going out to some of these associations on their time during the week or the weekend, then we should be doing that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, we would certainly commit to moving forward with another working group meeting. We can work on the aspects of the health impacts description, and we can certainly agree to moving forward with progress reports. There were a lot of good ideas that were expressed today. I think that one of the things that we should explore is actually approaching DOD on the bill specs and see if there's some inroads that we can make. We understand that it's a long process. We understand that a lot of the production has already been set, and the military would be loath to do that. But if we can look at the future and look at setting the technology away from that, that might aid in the transition. So there are a lot of good ideas that we heard today. We think that we also want to move forward as we have described, and we think that we can accomplish the goals of both. As you've recognized, staff has tried to do this in a balanced approach. I think that the rapid or the fairly quick progress reports will also provide the board and the committee with a much better sense of how the actual implementation is proceeding, and then allow for such action as it deems necessary.
I guess one last question I would have, if we were to try and say bifurcate the rule to some degree, I heard that word a couple times, and maybe look at just a rule just to get it out for the tanks that we know are the problems, or, you know, would that even be an option at the board date, or could we put that in our CEQA analysis so there would be an option for bifurcation? So we said, hey, we're going to take all this other stuff aside for right now as far as enclosure and everything else, but we're going to go after those tanks that we've already identified as problems. Could we do that?
That's essentially the approach we're taking. We're dealing with the tanks we know are problems and the housekeeping issues, and even within the rule, we're being very strong about the pathway forward on the other issues of the fume suppressants and the alternatives. So essentially, we're not taking final action on those other issues yet, but we're committing to studies. We are actually committing to a phase out of the fume suppressants if we can't find something that can replace them safely. So it's essentially the approach we're proposing.
Would the enclosures be in that as an option that day, or the enclosures are part of the rule as well, right?
Yeah, there'll be options on our proposal for the board if they wanted to make some changes on certain provisions, if they wanted to delay some provisions but accept other ones.
Okay.
But most of those controls have on-ramps, right, Phil? The total enclosure.
Right. Total
right,
enclosure.
they'd have to fail in order to have that requirement.
But
But, Mr. Chairman, one of the things
that
that...
when we get to the board, and we're not just stuck with one or the other at that point. So.
Right. I think one of the things that we'd like to suggest or offer is instead of the 30-day set hearing in here in June, go with the 60-day set hearing. So we could do set hearing in May, have some time to continue to work with the groups, and then go in July.
I think that'd be very appropriate.
I think that's even better. Happy to see that extension.
All right, I got 3 board members saying yes to that, so we're good for that. So a 30-day delay in the process right now, and we'll continue to work with everybody.
So we're going to move ahead with the 60-day set
Yes.
hearing for July.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. That concludes that item. We have a couple written reports that are attached. Do our board members have any questions on those?
No.
Do our board members have any other business they'd like to bring forward? And public comment items not on the agenda. I think I saw one more comment card come in. Was there any more cards? Or any public comment on any items not on the agenda? Thank you all for coming. That's the adjournment of our meeting.